Hey guys, so this is the video for assignment one. And in assignment one, we're going to uh, photograph a moving subject. And we're going to photograph a moving subject three different ways. Okay, so the first way we're going to photograph the moving subject is we're going to freeze the movement. The second way we're going to photograph the moving subject is we're going to intentionally allow the movement to blur. And then finally, the third method is we're going to do a technique called panning. Okay, and so with this panning method, it requires the subject to be moving across your field of view from right to left or left to right. And really, that's like the definition of panning. If you guys are video majors, you know, panning a camera means moving it from side to side. Okay, like as in right to left or left to right. Okay, so that's going to be the third technique. So in this first picture, guys, we're looking at frozen movement of the subject, okay? And you'll notice it a little bit more maybe when we look at the other pictures. But you know, this is probably the most important picture of this assignment to get correct, okay? And basically, the way you freeze movement in a still image is to shoot at a fast shutter speed, okay? Hint, hint, hint. Know this very well. The way you freeze movement in a still image is to shoot at a fast shutter speed. Now that sounds easy enough, right? Just crank up your shutter speed and push the button, right? But not quite. Because remember when we make an exposure, you know, shutter speed and aperture kind of work together, okay? And ISO is thrown in there, you know, just for fun, okay? So on this picture, I'll tell you the settings that I shot this picture at. And it was 1/2000th of a second at f4 at 400 ISO. Now you can see this wasn't a real sunny day. Okay, in fact, I shot this picture a couple months ago, um, and it was kind of cold out, and it wasn't very sunny out. Okay, I metered off the grass in the background. Okay, if you think about it, like the way the light is hitting my subject, which is my son Brendan, the way the light's hitting him, and the way the light's hitting the grass is essentially exactly the same. Okay, so I metered off the grass in the background and then photographed him as he rode by. Okay, now I told him I set this up so that he rides on that. So you see where the road's been kind of patched or like there's little tar strips. I told him to ride right about that tar strip so I could pre-focus the camera on that spot by pushing the shutter release button halfway down. And if I'm on AFS on my Nikon or autofocus one shot on my Canon, that's going to lock in the focus as long as I push the button in halfway down and continue to hold it there. So I locked in the focus on the ground where he's going to be. Okay, so first I got the exposure correct by balancing my light meter. I knew I wanted to shoot at a fast shutter speed. So actually the first thing I did is opened up the aperture all the way, okay, to a small f-stop number, right? So f4 was the smallest f-stop number, or in other words, the biggest aperture that I could shoot at. Okay, and when I opened up the aperture all the way, lots of light is flooding in through the lens. That forces me then to shoot at a faster shutter speed. And so the light conditions were such that, you know, at 400 ISO, my light meter balanced at 1/2000th of a second at f4. 1/2000th of a second. That's a fast shutter speed. And as you can see, I mean, he's pedaling his bike, his spokes are rotating around, and you can see every single spoke very clearly defined. Okay, so that's a good indication then that this was shot at a fast shutter speed. Anytime you use a fast shutter speed, you're usually going to need your aperture wide open. Okay, so when we start to look at people's pictures, even your own pictures, start to evaluate not only, okay, is it too bright or too dark or whatever, okay? When I look at this picture, I know it was shot at a fast shutter speed because I see those spokes very clearly defined. Okay, so on this first shot then, let me just reiterate. In order to freeze movement in a still image, you have to shoot at a fast shutter speed. But in order to get to a fast shutter speed, you have to open up your aperture all the way to a small f-stop number. Okay. By the way, on this shot, I'm shooting at 35 millimeters, and he's riding past me. He's probably 15 feet away from me, maybe as much as 20 feet away from me. Okay, on this assignment, guys, make sure your subject is no more than 25 feet away from you. So I'm standing on the opposite side of the street. This is our neighborhood. I'm standing on the opposite side of the street. I actually cropped this picture in a little tighter. The only editing I've done to it is crop it in a little tighter so that um, you could see like the detail a little bit better. Okay, but I'm shooting with a 35 millimeter lens. 1/2000th of a second at f4 at 400 ISO. Now, if it was any cloudier than this, right, I might have to kick up my ISO. So if I double my ISO, my camera absorbs this same amount of light twice as fast. Okay, if I go from 400 ISO, which I'm at in this picture, to 800 ISO, my camera would absorb this light twice as fast. Okay, which in turn, if I leave my aperture at f4, would allow me to shoot at twice as fast as shutter speed. So I could have shot this at 1/4000th of a second at f4 at 800 ISO. Okay, my camera goes up to 1/4000th of a second, so that was very doable. Okay, now he's riding his bike, he's not riding it that fast right here, so I was pretty comfortable that 1/2000th of a second was going to freeze the movement. But if this was a car driving by, and maybe you get a car driving by, maybe you get somebody who's like an avid bike rider, avid mountain biker or something like that, and they're riding much faster than he is, okay? You might want to get to that 1/4000th of a second to ensure that you're going to freeze the movement. So guys, when I'm grading this, I'm looking for absolutely no blur in this shot, okay? This fine detail in his spokes and everything like that, we should be able to see that. His feet shouldn't be blurry from the pedaling motion or anything like that, okay? So your goal, guys, is to shoot probably at least 1/1000th of a second, but you have to balance the light meter still. Okay, you don't want a picture that's way too dark because you're shooting at a fast shutter speed. So you're going to crank open your aperture, balance the light meter by increasing the shutter speed. Guys, shoot this outdoors. Okay, don't try to do this inside with like little racing cars or something like that. You're going to put yourself in a really bad spot, and you're going to find yourself shooting at like 6400 ISO, okay? And your picture, which should be crystal clear, okay, is going to look really grainy because you're shooting at too high of an ISO, really noisy, okay? So shoot it outdoors, okay? Um, it's super cloudy out, so I'm shooting at 400 ISO right here, okay? Now on this next shot, this is going to be our blur shot, okay? And on our blur shot, you're going to see that the subject looks blurry, but everything else in the picture looks clear. Okay, so you can see that road like right where I told you I pre-focused, right? And I told him each time just to ride right on that sort of black tar line. Okay, so that's where I focused the camera before he even got there. All right, and you're going to see then that the whole rest of the picture is clear and he's the only thing blurry. Okay, well, how do we do that? We intentionally shoot at a slower shutter speed. Okay, so in this case, I'm still at 400 ISO. Okay, and basically, guys, I'm going to tell you the trick is shoot at the slowest shutter speed you can without breaking the golden rule. Okay, well, you're using a 35 millimeter lens. You have to use a 35 millimeter lens on this normal focal length lens. Okay, um, so when you're using your normal focal length lens, what's the slowest shutter speed you can shoot at while hand holding the camera? 1/60th of a second, right? Your shutter speed must be equal to or greater than the focal length. Your focal length is 35. Use a bigger shutter speed number than 35, okay? So we want to shoot at the slowest one we can without breaking the golden rule. In this case, I'm shooting at 1/60th of a second at f22 at 400 ISO. Okay, 1/60th of a second, f22 at 400 ISO. Okay, and this is what I ended up with. Okay, now you see, my point of focus down there by the road is perfectly clear. Okay, and the trick with this one is as he comes into the shot, I can't move the camera. If I move the camera, I'm going to have a panning effect, a slight panning effect, and we don't want that. Okay, so you're going to see what the panning effect looks like on the next picture. We don't want that on this shot. We want everything in the picture that's not moving to be crystal clear, and only the subject's movement to appear blurry. Okay, So again, he's not even riding that fast, and 1/60th of a second gave us pretty good blur. Okay, now we would use this technique in real life, guys, if we wanted to show action in a picture, but the particular subject themselves was kind of irrelevant. Okay, or we didn't even want that subject to be identifiable. Okay, so you might be making a poster for a bicycle race or a car race or a running race or something like that, and you want to show lots of action and excitement. Okay, but you don't necessarily want to get a model release from the 200 people starting the marathon that you have. So what you do then is you shoot at a really slow shutter speed. Okay, and maybe there's a Detroit Marathon banner right across the top of the road. Okay, and that's not moving, so you're going to be able to, your viewer's going to be able to read that just perfectly fine. But if you shoot at a nice slow shutter speed, the people themselves are going to be blurred out. Okay, so now you have, right, unidentifiable individuals. Okay, but you're showing the action of the Detroit Marathon or something like that. Okay, so that's kind of what you would do with this one. Okay, now you can use the slow shutter speed technique for other things, and at the end of the video I'm going to show you some other things that I really like to use the slow shutter speed for. Okay, moving water is one of the coolest things you can photograph at a slow shutter speed. Okay, and then when we get to the night assignment, you'll see moving traffic, right, like cars driving by. Okay, but your goal, guys, is to sort of give me the same picture 3 times using all 3 techniques. Okay, now this last technique is really cool. Okay, this is our panning technique. Okay, now the panning technique is really important for you to use if you have a situation where maybe there's not a lot of light, like this was a pretty cloudy day, okay, and you're finding it hard to freeze the movement of the subject because there's not a lot of light and still keep a reasonably low ISO. Now in this case, I shot this one at 1/20th of a second at f/22, and I dropped the ISO down to ISO 100. Okay, so we're at 100 ISO, and the reason I did that is because remember I was at 1/60th of a second at f/22 on the first blur shot. Okay, at 400 ISO. Okay, when I make my panning shot, I'm going to intentionally break the golden rule here. Okay, I'm going to break it by up to 2 stops. I'm going to make sure my image stabilization is turned off, my vibration reduction is turned off, because remember what your image stabilization or your vibration reduction is trying to do. It's trying to freeze the movement of the camera. Okay, and if it's successful, then you don't get that super cool panning effect in the background. Okay, but you'll notice this one, his torso and his face and his arms are all really clear, but we don't see the spokes, right? Because the shutter speed's slow. Okay, and the spokes aren't traveling in that same direction that I'm moving the camera with him at. Okay, so I'm moving the camera right to left across our field of view as he drives by right to left. Okay, and so if I do it right at the right speed, okay, even at a slow shutter speed, what that's going to do is it's going to freeze everything in the picture that's moving that same direction at the same speed that I'm panning the camera, but it's still going to blur other things in the picture. So this is a really cool technique to use to freeze movement, right? We can see him pretty well. We're freezing movement, but we're doing it at a slow shutter speed. So, let's say you're either indoors or really low light conditions, outdoors or something like that, or you just want to shoot at a really low ISO, right? In this case, I'm shooting at 100 ISO. Okay, even though I don't have to, I could be shooting at 400, right? Because you already saw I was shooting at 400 and I could freeze the movement just fine at 400. Okay, but if I just want to do this even just for creative effect, okay, maybe I got all the frozen shots in the world. Okay, I'm photographing the Detroit Grand Prix and I got all kinds of frozen shots of the cars driving by. Okay, I'm shooting at 1/8,000th of a second, super fast shutter speed. And now I decide, you know what? I'm going to try to do some panning to make this look really cool. Okay, and so the panning technique can be used both as a method to freeze movement when you're in low light conditions, or it can just be used for creative effect. Okay, so all we're going to do, guys, is we're still going to focus on that black line that you see that he's riding on. I'm focusing the camera there, pushing the shutter release button part way down. Again, if I'm on AFS, autofocus single servo on Nikons, or autofocus one shot on Canons, holding the shutter release button part way down locks in that focusing distance. Now, if you want to, you could lock in that focusing distance and then turn off your autofocus. Okay, and so then your subject is going to be in pretty sharp focus right as it passes that point. Okay, and this is kind of how you do it in real life. I mean, you have other autofocus systems built into your camera, I'm going to tell you, that we don't teach in this class right now, that could potentially sort of track with him. Okay, but we're not going to do it that way. We're just going to lock in our focus on a certain point. Okay, and really the way focus is distance. Okay, so as long as your distance doesn't change to the subject, he's going to be in focus. Now, if I shoot him much earlier than this, maybe he's further back up the road. Okay, now he's going to be much further away from me than he is when he's on that black line. Okay, so now he's going to be out of focus even if I do the panning technique perfectly. Okay, now panning, guys, it's tricky. Okay, if your subject has any bounce to it, if your subject changes speed, if you don't pan at the right speed, your subject's not going to be clear. Okay, so it's tricky to do. Even once you've practiced it and you're good at it and you know how to do it and stuff like that, it's hard to do. Okay, and again, with this one, you can break the golden rule if you want to by a little bit. Again, that's why I lowered the ISO. Remember, I'm shooting this at 1/20th of a second with a 35mm lens. So that 20 in my shutter speed is less than 35, my focal length. I'm breaking the golden rule. But that's okay because I want to. I want to have that blurry effect in the background. Okay, so now the only thing I have to do is keep up with him. Again, this is one where, like, since I'm outdoors, I actually have to close down my aperture really small to f/22. I have to lower my ISO down to 100, okay, just so I can get down there to that really slow shutter speed, 1/20th of a second while I'm outdoors. Okay, so this is a tricky one to do, guys. It's going to take some practice. Okay, your goal for this assignment, guys, is to turn in all three of these pictures so that they look exactly the same. Okay, I'm sorry, so that they look exactly the same overall brightness, right? So that your exposure is correct on all three pictures. Okay, but you want to show frozen movement with the fast shutter speed at first, and then you want to show blurred movement with a slower shutter speed. Okay, but not, don't break the golden rule on this one. Just shoot at the slower shutter speed you can without breaking the golden rule. Okay, 1/60th of a second, hint, hint, hint. Okay, you're using a 35mm lens. Shoot at 1/60th of a second. Okay, and then finally, with the panning shot, you intentionally want to move the camera, which if you recall from the first lecture, I told you one of the best ways to improve your pictures is hold the camera still. Okay, well now here we are in assignment one, we're breaking that rule already. Okay, in most cases, especially with the blur shot where you're shooting at 1/60th of a second, you gotta hold the camera still. Okay, but the panning shot, we're intentionally moving the camera with the subject. Okay, if you can turn in three pictures of the same subject doing the same thing, but using all three techniques, then that shows me you have like good camera skills. Okay, so some of you guys, but try this with different subjects. Okay, I mean, I would suggest try it with different subjects just for fun and see which set you like the best overall. Okay, I'm mainly, again, on the first shot, on the frozen action shot, I'm looking for that wide open aperture. I'm looking for a real fast shutter speed. Okay, proper exposure, of course, good focus on the subject, of course. I mean, exposure, basic overall exposure and focus are the two most basic things you have to get right from here on forward. Okay, but now we have to use a fast shutter speed on this shot. How do we get to a fast shutter speed? Open up the aperture. If we still can't get up there to 1/1000th of a second, 1/2000th of a second, or something like that, then we can increase the ISO. But I would start off at 400 ISO. I mean, especially if it's sunny out, you got plenty of light to work with. Okay, you might, if you're shooting out when it's sunny out, the hardest shot to do might be the panning shot because it's going to be hard to get down to a slow shutter speed. Even at 100 ISO, it's going to be hard to get down to a really slow shutter speed to get a good strong panning effect like what you see in my panning picture. Okay, but on the on the first picture, I'm just looking for a fast shutter speed. How do we get to a fast shutter speed? Open up the aperture, boost up the ISO if necessary. Okay. On the second shot, the blurred shot, okay, and by the way, on the first shot, let me go back to that for 1 second. I'm also looking for absolutely no blur in the picture. Absolutely no blur. So if you do this kind of same thing where you have, a family member or somebody riding a bike across the field of view, I mean, zoom in on their foot and make sure it's not blurry. Zoom in on their pedals and make sure, I'm sorry, on their spokes or their pedals or whatever. Make sure there's no blur. Make sure you can read, even like the smallest type that might be on the side of their bike. Okay, so do your best with that. I zoomed in on this picture so that you could see it closely. Okay, that how everything's frozen. Okay, on the blur shot, everything in the picture's got to be clear. Okay, no camera movement. Okay, hold the camera as still as possible. Okay, while the subject rides across your field of view. Okay, so when I look at the surface of the ground, okay, or the background, everything should be pretty clear. Okay, where there's no panning effect at all. You didn't nudge the camera at all to keep the subject in the frame. By the way, in order to do this though, for all of these shots, we were shooting on single shutter drive before. You push the button and it takes one picture. Okay, this time I would suggest going to continuous shutter drive where you push the button and hold it down and it takes multiple pictures. Okay, click, 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 right? It takes like 3 or 4 pictures really fast in like a second. Okay, so that way your subject will be, in one of those 3 or 4 pictures, your subject's going to be in the frame in the right spot where you want them to be. Okay, and then finally on the panning shot, again, same thing. Use the continuous shutter, but remember you don't want to release the shutter until the subject gets right out to where you pre-focus the camera. So, like I pre-focused the camera on this black line here, so I waited till my subject got right about to that spot before I started releasing the shutter. Okay, if I release it too early, he's gonna be out of focus because he's much further away from me than my focusing distance. Okay, so if he's too far away, then it's not gonna work. Okay, and if he's too close, it's not gonna work. Okay, so I'm gonna focus the camera straight out in front of me, like directly perpendicular with where he's riding, and then lock in that focus by holding the shutter release button part way down until I'm ready to release the shutter the rest of the way. Okay, again, I could also, once I lock in the focus with the autofocus, I could turn off the autofocus and now the focusing distance is not going to change for me. Okay, but I'm going to want to retest that like each time I go to do another round of shots. Okay, turn the autofocus back on, make sure I'm locking in the focus where I want it to be. Okay, all right, guys, so stay tuned for the rest of this video where I'm actually doing this shoot with him, and you'll see how it went for me. Okay, and we'll try to see if there's any flaws in any of the pictures or anything. Okay, but again, the rest of the video is only it's not much longer, so stick with it and enjoy this assignment. Talk to you soon. Bye. Okay, guys, so here's the video. Let's start over. 3, 2, 1. Okay, guys, so here's the video for assignment 1. Okay, this is our motion assignment, and our subject, Brendan, is going to be riding his bike across our field of view. Okay, on the first shot, we want to shoot at a fast shutter speed to freeze the movement of him riding by. Okay, now our light is very flat and very even. It's not super sunny out. Okay, not a big deal. All right, because we can always kick up the ISO if we have to get to a faster shutter speed. But the first step to get to a fast shutter speed is opening up our aperture all the way. Okay, so I'm going to shoot with my Nikon D500 35mm lens. Okay, I'm going to start off with 400 ISO because 400 works for everything until it doesn't. And I'm going to meter the light off of the grass across the street at my house. Okay, and at 400 ISO, I'm going to open up. At 400 ISO, I'm going to open up my aperture to f4, and I'm just going to speed up my shutter until my light meter balances. Okay, so at f4, at 400 ISO, my light meter is balancing at 1/2000th of a second. That's probably going to be a fast enough shutter speed to freeze him riding by. Okay, B, go ahead and get in position.
Okay.
Up there. Okay, turn it around. Okay, and then I'm going to have you come by going this way.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to see how this turns out. Okay, and I can do a little test shot right here. Okay. And we can see how nice the exposure is right there. Very good. All right, B. Hey, get a little bit closer to this side. Hey,
Okay,
where I want you to ride by, you see this black line right here?
Yep.
Try to ride pretty much like right on that. Now, you don't have to be looking down and concentrating, but you got to be close to that.
Okay.
Okay, guys, so you see I'm kind of staging this, right? I told him where I want him to ride. There's a little black stripe where they kind of patched up the pavement right there. So I want to focus, I'm going to pre-focus my camera on that distance. Okay, so I'm using my single area autofocus on AFS, autofocus single servo. So what that means is when I push down the shutter release part way, it locks in the focus at that distance. Now what I could do if I wanted to, okay, I could turn off the autofocus, okay, and now as long as I stay at the same distance, I'm going to get a little closer because we have to be like less than 25 feet away from our subject. Brendan, get on your bike and get ready.
Okay.
I'll be ready for you. Okay, so now my focus is locked in. My focus is locked in, so now I turn off the autofocus. Come on, B, let's go.
All right.
The video world is waiting. And I'm going to just wait for him to get there. Okay, you can turn it around now, B. Okay, so one other thing I did is I set my shutter drive to continuous. Let's see if you can see that. Continuous high. So that means my shutter is going to fire rapidly. Click, 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 click. Right? As long as I hold down the shutter release button. Okay. Now, I just changed my distance to my subject. I'm going to go back to autofocus. Okay. I'm going to refocus on the spot where he's going to be. And I'm going to try it again. Come on, B. Whenever you're ready. Keep riding right past me. Ride right past me. Right on that black line, please. Ride it, ride it, ride it. Got to start off going uphill a little bit. I'm going to hold my camera very still the whole time. Okay, I held my camera very still the whole time. It's very important. Okay, now this time, I'm going to try to make him look blurry as he rides by. Okay, so instead of shooting at a fast shutter speed, like 1/2000th of a second, I'm going to slow it way down. I'm going to close down my aperture. I don't want a lot of light coming through the shutter. I'm sorry, through the aperture, or through the lens. I don't want a lot of light coming through there because I want to shoot at a slow shutter speed. Okay, and now my light meter balances at about 1/60th of a second at f/25. Okay, so about a third of a stop closed down more than f/22. Okay, so now I'm going to have him, I'm going to pick my focus point, lock it in, and then just wait for him to get here. Okay, all right, turn it around. Okay, so now I shot at 1/60th of a second at f/25, and he's not riding very fast, but you can see he's kind of a blur right there. Okay, and I might even be a little bit underexposed, so maybe 1/60th of a second at f/22 would have been better. Okay, makes more sense actually when we think about 1/2000th of a second at f4, 1/60th of a second at f/22 might have been better. Okay, so we might have to brighten that picture up a little bit, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Maybe get back into your spot.
Okay, Dad.
Okay, now this time I'm going to do a technique called panning. So I'm still going to shoot at a slow shutter speed. I'm actually going to drop the ISO down to 100 ISO and still shoot at f/22 this time. I'm going to make sure my vibration reduction or image stabilization is turned off. Okay, because I want to have this panning effect. So how this works is kind of the same way. I'm still going to lock in my focus where he's going to be as he crosses my field of view, but then I'm going to track with him or pan with him. I'm going to move the camera actually, which is a big no-no usually in still photography. We don't want to move the camera, but we're going to do it this time. Okay, so we'll give that a try. So B, let me see what I got. Hold on.
Hold on.
Yep, go back to your starting point, please. All right, okay. Okay, so right here, as I lower the ISO to 100 ISO, what I'm finding is at f22, I have to slow down my shutter to about 1/20th of a second. That's very slow, right? We're breaking the golden rule. Your shutter speed must be equal to or greater than 35. Okay, and really, since this is a crop sensor camera, when I'm at 35, that's almost like a 52 millimeter lens. So really my shutter speed should be equal to or greater than 1/60th of a second right here. But I'm going for that strong panning effect. So I'm gonna break the golden rule. I'm gonna turn off the image stabilization and let's see what happens here. Be back up a little bit more, okay? So you can get going a little bit faster. So guys, once again, I'm locking in the focusing distance on that spot where he's going to be when he gets here. Then as he comes by, I'm going to pan with him. And you're going to see I'm going to keep the panning motion going all the way through, even after my shutter's done running. Okay? All right, B, whenever you're ready. And guys, I'm going to warn you, this panning technique, it looks super cool in the pictures, but it's really hard to do, okay? So you may not get it the first time or the second time or the third time, okay? You may have to do it over and over. I think I got a pretty good one here, but we're going to try it again. Gabby, we got to go one more time, that same direction, just like that.
All right.
Are you freezing? Hey, buddy, whenever you're ready.
All right. I'm ready.
Okay. So guys, one of the keys to getting the panning shot correct is to make sure you keep the camera moving. So resist the urge to stop just because you think your shutter's done. Just keep panning, okay? That's the opposite of on the blur shot. On the blur shot, you gotta hold your camera still and you gotta resist the urge of trying to keep your subject in frame, okay? All right, so we'll look at these pictures in just a minute and see what you think. Okay guys, so here we're taking a look at a couple more samples of using shutter speed to depict movement in different ways. Okay, so in this first picture, we're viewing moving water at a fast shutter speed. Okay, so you see, I mean, you can kind of see every detail of water. If this was like a fountain or something like that, we'd be able to see every little droplet of water if we shoot at a fast enough shutter speed. Okay, we're going to see in a second though, you can shoot at a fast shutter speed and still have blur if the shutter speed's not fast enough for the speed of the subject. Okay, we're going to see that in just a second too. Okay, in the second shot, now you're going to see the effect of a slow shutter speed on moving water. Okay, and this is one of my favorite things to do. I think I said earlier, right? One of my favorite things to do is shoot moving water at a slow shutter speed. Okay, it has what I like to call sort of the cotton candy effect. So you can see the water just looks like kind of fuzzy cotton candy. The same thing would happen if we were shooting a fountain or something like that at a slow shutter speed. Okay, so it has that kind of soft fuzzy look to it. Okay, the third picture we're looking at frozen movement again. Okay, and that's Gabby. She's just running out on the soccer field. Okay, but you can see, I mean, look at all the detail like in her hair. You can see like every strand of hair as it kind of flies up as she runs. So you know this was shot at a fast shutter speed. Okay, this next shot is the one I was talking about, where it's a fast shutter speed, but some of the movement is still blurred because the movement is so fast that the shutter speed I was using wasn't fast enough to completely freeze it. So you see the bat and the ball, they're still slightly blurred. Okay, so again, this is a fairly fast shutter speed. Most of the movement is frozen, but you know, the bat and the ball, I mean, the ball's probably traveling 80 plus miles per hour right there. Plus it's small. It's you know, has fine detail because it's small, and so it's hard to get it to look frozen unless you're shooting at an extremely fast shutter speed. Okay, and then the same thing too with the motion of the bat. You know, it's kind of whipping around really fast, so sort of the barrel of the bat comes through and hits the ball at a really high speed, and so you end up with a little bit of blur there. Could we get it to be frozen? Yes. Okay. This particular day that I was shooting this, you can kind of tell it's not real sunny out again. Okay, the light looks pretty flat and even. Okay, as opposed to being really like specular, real bright highlights, real dark shadows. So you don't see like that kind of contrast. And so if there was more light, I might be able to shoot at a shutter speed twice as fast as this, 4 times as fast as this. Okay, I could also kick up the ISO, you know, twice as high or 4 times as high to get up to those shutter speeds. But in this case, it still kind of worked as a frozen shot, and it's kind of a blurred shot as well. Okay, and then the last one's another sample of panning. It again, it's really fun to do, but it's hard to get it right. Okay, so using that continuous shutter will help you out with all of these shots. Okay, and again, most of the time we're always trying to keep the camera still, except for on the panning shot. Okay, so you know, and make sure you're turning off your image stabilization or vibration reduction. Again, I mean, you probably don't even need image stabilization on the fast shutter speed shot because you're shooting at such a fast shutter speed. Even if you move the camera a little bit, that movement's not going to show up. Okay. On the panning shot, you want to have that movement appearing in there. Okay. So the only one really where your image stabilization or vibration reduction might help you out is on the blur shot. But again, as long as you hold the camera still and don't break the golden rule, your image should be fine. Okay. All right, guys, good luck with this. And I look forward to seeing what you guys turn in. Thanks.